Hi, welcome back to the Apology Podcast. Today's guest is the musician and writer Ian Svenonius. It's a little bit of a tightrope act doing these intros sometimes because I want to explain the guest for people who don't know them, but I also don't want the guest's fans to be like, yeah, dude, we know, get on with it. But I don't know. I'm going to err on the side of the less familiar folks because I think that's more generous. So, Ian's musical life started when he was the singer and lyricist for the DC punk band The Nation of Ulysses. That was in the late 80s, early 90s. Ulysses felt like something entirely new when they came out. There was this conceptual framework to everything they did. The backstory was that they were a sort of terrorist youth organization who advocated such anti-parent culture activities as slicing the edges of your fingertips off to destroy your fingerprints, staying up all night. They equated sleep with death, eating lots of candy and wearing hickeys proudly as a sign of membership in the rebellion. They dressed really cool too, and they had really good hair. But behind all that amazing theatrical fronting, the music more than stood up on its own. After Ulysses broke up, Ian had the band Cupid Car Club. That was with a couple other Ulysses refugees and a new bass player. They only put out one thing. It was a 7-inch, but that's in my top 10 for that format. Maybe even my top 5. Just an incredible 7-inch. Then Ian and the same two Ulysses guys and the excellent bassist Michelle May started a new band called The Makeup. How do I explain The Makeup? They called their sound gospel yeye, and it was a fusion of what you would think from that name. So like part the heavy, soulful call and response side of American gospel music, and part like the bubblegum, like faux, naive sexuality of French yeye music, which was like, early Francois Hardy records or the singer France Gall. This intro is too long already, so I'll tell you about the rest of Ian's musical career after the interview and the outro, because I have to tell you about his writing real quick before we start. This is when I met Ian. When I was an editor at Index Magazine in the early 2000s, I approached him about writing for us because I loved his lyrics and the ephemera around his groups, like this great fanzine called Ulysses Speaks that went along with the Nation of Ulysses. So Ian ended up writing some really great stuff there for me, like a piece about reconsidering Paul McCartney as the coolest Beatle over the usual cool guy choices like John and George. But of course, Ian framed this as a quasi-social movement that he called RPM, Reconsider Paul McCartney. A lot of his best work from that era is collected in his first book, The Psychic Soviet, which Drag City put out in 2006. Ian's next book, which I'm really proud to have edited, is called Supernatural Strategies for Making a Rock and Roll Group. Akashic Books put this one out in 2012, and it's pretty amazing. The concept is built around a seance in which deceased musical legends like Brian Jones and Mary Wells and Buddy Holly give us advice on how to start a band. But what it really is a super sharp and funny critique of all sides of music creation and musician personas. His most recent book, Censorship Now, is another essay collection that includes a piece that was first published in Apology magazine about how dances like the twist coincided with sexual repression. One last thing, Ian and I did a music interview web series in the late 2000s. I directed and he interviewed. He talked with people like Ian MacKaye and Henry Rollins, Genesis Peorage, Will Oldham, Sonic Boom, Sean Marshall, Ad Rock. It was a great lineup of guests, and it was really fun. We got to travel all over doing it. The company that owns that stuff is it's like mercurial at best, but you can still find certain episodes floating around on the web. Okay, shit, that was a really long intro. So here, finally, is the Ian Svenonius episode of the Apology Podcast.
So, what are you reading right now?
Well, I'm not really reading anything. I pride myself on being a person who moves with the times, and now I feel like people just don't get their information from reading. So I mostly get it from I get my information from YouTube tutorials and things like that. People give reading and literacy a kind of exalted status because at one point it was for, the upper classes or the clerics. Only the rabbis could read. I think as soon as, literacy was instituted, by socialists, it became kind of a little déclassé.
Mm-hmm. It got diluted.
Yeah, it got diluted.
So do you think, should we return to like an oral tradition like the Greeks had? Or have we done that already with
we already
videos?
have in pictograms. I mean, I think the medieval church, they had a lot of pictograms, and I think we're back at that.
Instagram, pictogram.
Pictogram, yeah. That's a little like the lessons that we learned from the cathedral walls. The Instagram is giving us the same kind of lessons.
So then what are you watching lately?
The lessons are mostly like that you should be on vacation a lot. Mm-hmm. That the more exotic the locale, the better. And or there's a few, I don't know, there's few places that are particularly desirable.
You should also eat a lot of beautiful, sort of simply arranged food and photograph it from above, looking down, right?
Yeah.
And then post that.
Well, that's interesting. That perspective from above.
It's big on Instagram. It's kind of the way to present, like sort of fussily present things you've bought.
Because that's how buzzards see food, but that's also how God sees our meals. So,
God monitors all our meals.
As God circles above us, like the buzzard that he is, waiting for our flesh.
And we rise and fall in status with him based on what we're eating.
Exactly, yeah. So he's really impressed by the California kitchen.
Yeah, he's a big fan
fresh
of
produce and
yeah. But he does have a soft spot for, the Cheesecake Factory as well.
That's true.
All right, so you don't read now. What about, when's the last time you did read? When did you stop reading?
Well, I was just in like the 20th hour of the Peter Guralnick Elvis book.
Oh, I never read that.
Well, I'd read the second half, which is called Careless Love. And I hadn't read which is all about his debauched post-army life, Elvis's debauched post-army life. And, of course, Elvis was introduced to, drugs by the U.S. military.
Speed.
Yeah, and downers, uppers, downers, all, which they didn't really think of as drugs, I guess. But, I really think that we can credit the army with, for the counterculture, really.
Because of
conscription, universal conscription. Everybody was drafted, and then they were fed these drugs, and it really the whole counterculture, the thing that we've embraced as being anti-authoritarian, is really instituted by the ultimate authority.
Mm-hmm. We can all. It's the same. It's kind of parallel to how we can thank the CIA for LSD.
LSD, and of course the internet. Yeah, was developed for the army.
And LSD and the internet go really well together, I think.
Yeah.
They both rewire your brain.
Absolutely.
So you've got this Elvis book and you skipped to the second half?
Oh, well, I'd read the second half already, which is just a kind of laundry list of, Cadillacs that he's buying for people and, his drug use and, it's kind of, his decline.
Yeah.
Like the decline of the Roman Empire probably took as long as the rise of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Goths destroyed both the Roman Empire and Elvis. Right?
He did get quite gothic in the late 60s.
It's true, he did. The black leather.
Yeah, and the eyeliner and everything. And he dressed his wife up to be very goth.
Oh, yeah, I remember like the Morticia Addams hair and the Cole eyeliner.
Yeah, that's interesting. The Goths, that's interesting, the Goths.
The Visigoths or the Goths in England and the
Ostrogoths.
Okay.
But they're all supposed to be the same people. They're from Gotland, which is actually southwestern Sweden.
And your people come from there, no?
But it's weird that they don't get more credit for destroying civilization.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the Roman Empire, we generally talk about its flourishing, right? Its high moments. Is it because the Goths weren't glamorous enough?
I don't know.
They didn't have togas. They didn't have homosexuality and reading and all these sort of enlightened things. Yeah, well,
that's interesting because a Gothic font is one without serifs. Uh-huh. So they hadn't even figured out
the ornamentation. They're like, forget it.
No, I didn't. No, what I mean is they don't get that much credit for destroying civilization, which is which is our. Everybody wants to destroy civilization.
Yeah.
It's kind of our primary impulse, I think, right?
Do you think civilization as we know it now can be destroyed, or is it kind of a too big to fail thing? You know, can a civilization still be destroyed, the dominant one, like Rome was?
Well, I think like it's being
A sort of nuclear holocaust.
Yeah. Well, I think like civilization, it's being destroyed every day, piecemeal by these new, like some app comes out and it destroys, like Airbnb comes out, it destroys the hotel civilization.
But it just right, the dominant paradigm of hotels. But it gets destroyed and instantaneously recreated. What about destroying it and leaving nothing in its place, right?
Yeah.
Like end hotels altogether. There's no such thing as paying for lodging for one night only anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
I don't know.
That would be a beautiful
I think
thing.
we need that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that you talked about jumping to the second half of the biography, because I thought you meant something different, which is what I do when I read bios a lot. Is I skip their childhood.
Yeah,
I don't really care about, like, I'm reading a new biography of Edward Gorey.
Oh yeah,
right now, right? And I don't care about him up until he gets to the army and then Harvard. Basically, I don't really need to know what his parents were like.
Yeah,
but I'm also reading a new bio of Nietzsche, and I want to know what his parents were like.
Yeah,
I guess it depends on the person.
Nietzsche was a Libra.
I was going to ask also, what was Elvis?
Capricorn.
How do we see Elvis's Capricornness in his?
He was into nice things, and he was driven, ambitious, and he had a good work ethic, and he's quite social,
mm-hmm.
but conservative, very conservative, anti-drug actually.
How did he manage to be anti-drug?
Anti-drinking. He didn't drink.
He didn't drink, but he was a huge drug addict. How did he?
But they weren't drugs back then. They were army instituted.
Right. They were like cyborg. It was like
Prozac isn't really a drug.
I beg to differ.
But I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I guess so. It's enhancement. It's like having.
It's a corrective. It's just correcting. It's making us the way we should be.
It's also augmenting reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but Edward Gorey, he was into the opera.
Yes, but the ballet.
The ballet.
Yeah, he was a George Balanchine freak.
Oh yeah, Balanchine. Yeah, and he wore a long fur coat.
Wore long fur coats, often dyed bright colors, like a yellow fur coat. But then he'd wear like Keds, dirty Keds, along with that. Mm-hmm. And he'd go. I think he didn't miss a Balanchine performance of a Balanchine ballet for like 3 or 4 decades.
Wow.
And then he moved away. He went up to Boston, outside of Boston, when that era at the ballet at the ABC ended.
A lot of the Edward Gorey characters seem to be, anorexic, and that's also a feature of ballet.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if the ballet informed his characters, or if he was drawn to ballet.
I don't know, because most of his characters are children, also
anorexic children.
And a lot of ballerinas are anorexic children. What's the earliest book you remember reading on your own as a child?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Probably Watership Down or Lord of the Rings. I was reading it at quite a high level early on, but then I regressed, in later elementary school and started reading, Peanuts books vociferously. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I was definitely, into the Tolkien thing, and
I love the feel of Tolkien, and I think the movies, I think we can agree the movies got it really wrong. Like it's a very murky, dark, moody kind of world, right? In Tolkien.
Well, he's from, Birmingham. Tolkien
which
was
is
from
like,
Birmingham, which is the same as Black Sabbath.
Right.
And it's very, it feels, you can really, when you're there, the air quality and the light, mm-hmm. you can really see where he was coming from.
The snot in your nose changes after a couple hours in Birmingham.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it turns sort of gray. It happened to me.
Wow.
Yeah, I was in a club called Birmingham Rock City for something. I can't remember what. And somebody told me, check your snot out if it's your first time here in a couple hours.
Wow.
And I did, and it was like, it looked like soot.
crazy.
Yeah.
The Midlands.
Yeah.
It's also where Lawrence is from.
T.E. Lawrence.
No, the
from Felt.
the rock star.
From Felt. Yeah, that makes sense.
And yeah. And he seems a little, gloomy.
I don't know too much about him, and I don't know that I need to.
There's a documentary.
Okay.
I haven't gotten to watch it yet, but yeah.
What kind of value was given to books and reading in your house as a kid? Your parents, like their habits around that kind of stuff.
Quite a lot, because they were academics and they were from I feel like they were from an earlier sensibility where, so we had walls, full of books.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were those kind of, philosophical or sociological books that, are written in a particular style.
Mm-hmm. Did you pick up their books and read them?
Yeah, definitely, or at least looked at them.
What were their specialties academically?
Just ethics, medieval philosophy.
Sweeney.
Philosophy.
Matt Sweeney's dad was a medievalist.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We talked about it a lot when I talked to him for this podcast.
No way.
Yeah. His dad was a Chaucer freak, Wow. But he taught. He was a Jesuit.
No.
Yeah, and then he became a medievalist. Yeah.
Wow.
So wait, what did what did your dad teach? What did your mom teach? What were their actual disciplines?
Symbolic logic, medieval philosophy, things like that.
What's it like to have a symbolic logician for a parent?
It really taught me something about academics. They don't really want to walk outside of their field of study because there's I think it's a minefield over there in academia. You don't want to talk out of turn if it's not your thing.
Also, maybe when you come to know so much about one thing, it's hard. You're afraid to step outside of that because you don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
When you can be right all the time with the thing that you're an expert in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is symbolic logic? I don't know what that is.
I don't know either.
You don't know? I mean, really?
Well, it's it's a sort of math.
Reading the world of symbology, that kind of thing?
It really looks like math, but for some reason it's in the philosophy department.
I never understood the connection between math and philosophy. It happens a lot.
Yeah.
Thinking of like David Foster Wallace, big math guy, right?
Yeah, math, music, philosophy. I feel like, the secret to the world is that it all used to be one thing. Like a theologian used to weigh in on everything.
Right.
And then somehow things got, parsed out. Do you know what I mean?
Why do you think that happened? I do know what you mean.
If you look at the, Industrial Revolution and, suddenly people became, specialized or whatever. You had to be specialized because we started imitating. Tools have to be very particular. Right. A Phillips head screwdriver is different than a flathead screwdriver, and they really can't be used interchangeably.
Yeah.
So machines, are very particular, and people became very, particular. And now in the post-industrial age, we're all supposed to be everything again. But, before industrialization, do you ever think about, if you took a time machine, how inept you'd be at everything?
Depends on where I go and when.
Yeah.
But,
if you went, back to the Old West and, would you know how to tie up your horse? Tying up a horse, that's, in the Westerns, they do it so effortlessly. Yeah, and there's, a way to do it. What if you were suddenly transported, and even if you knew how to ride a horse, it's
I'd lose my horse.
Yeah, or you might look kind of goofy.
I also can't ride a horse, so that's in the first place, I'll never get anywhere. People would be, I don't know, it would be very difficult, I think. And the thing that's always scared me about time travel is the idea of the lack of pain management in the past. Like dentistry.
Yeah, well, there was a lot more alcohol involved.
And ether.
Yeah, and people were just drunk all the time.
Right.
And when you go to a place that's still sort of in the Middle Ages, parts of Europe, people are still drunk.
Like where in Europe?
England or something, Still a little bit, the sensibility is still held over from the,
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think we've talked about this before when we went to England together. We were saying how never forget that England is an island nation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a cold island in the North Atlantic.
Yeah, and they're still just drunk all the time because you have to be. But when we see that behavior, we're like, we would have an intervention. If it was our friend, we have to have an intervention.
We're appalled. Yeah, right.
But, it's quite normal there. And it's not, it's because it's not detrimental to the way that they live, in a cottage on the Shire.
Yeah, in Hobbiton. Cowboys were drunk all the time, too. I think in the past, most people were drunk most of the time.
Yeah, people were drunk because you didn't have to drive. And then as soon as, people realized that, drunk driving was bad sometime in the 1980s.
Yeah, it was the 80s.
They pathologized drinking, and now it's a big, it's a moral issue, and people are always getting down on you for being drunk in the middle of the day, and your friends and family have an intervention on, on you.
Those don't work. What's the furthest back you think you specifically could travel in time and like not be outed as a time traveler? How far back could you go? You walk out the door here in Los Angeles and you're in what year?
This is interesting because I was working on a screenplay idea. I mean, this is because I'm in Los Angeles, and I wanted to fit in. So I was like, I'm going to work on a screenplay. Right. And so I was thinking about maybe a group of people, and they're like historians. Well, it's kind of like Napoleon's little band of scientists that he got together right before he invaded Egypt. Yeah. So there's an expert, different experts, and they have a time machine, and they're going to go back and study these different eras, distinct eras. And so they go back to the first one, and they go way back to the Stone Age. Mm-hmm. And immediately they're like,
we have to get the fuck out of here.
There's nothing that they can eat, so they're like, fuck, basically, I don't know, they kill a dinosaur, and they're trying to cook it according to, Gordon Ramsay's
right
dinosaur recipe.
Dinosaur on risotto.
Yeah, and then they're like, oh, this is disgusting, whatever. So they're like, well, let's go forward to history to a era when we can eat the food.
Right.
And they go, like, let's say they go to, I don't know, Babylonia, ancient Babylon. Uh-huh. And they immediately find, oh, well, we can't eat this food because of this and this and this. And anyway, they keep going forward through history to different eras. And each time they're just like, the food just won't do because, so then they're like, oh, well, maybe we should go to a period with leavened bread, so then they go, and then they're like, oh, this bread sucks, blah. And then they finally figure out that like, well, maybe we could go to like that era, like 2 years before our era, when our favorite restaurant was still open. Mm-hmm. But then they go, to that restaurant, and they realize it's not
that good. So it's about nostalgia.
Yeah, and food.
Well, they're very linked.
Well, it's kind of like it's like a version of Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, I guess. Now that I'm talking about it, because that's a movie about people who are trying to eat and they can't.
Okay, but that's interesting. But what I was asking you is, think about it this way. What's the furthest back you could go in time when you walk out the door and nobody's going to want to arrest you or kill you based on how you look or speak? Is it the 60s?
Oh, yeah. That's a good
for you.
Good
it's
question.
Not the 50s, right? With that hair.
I don't know. I feel like, if you went back to the 1890s, people probably looked quite outrageous.
That's a good point.
And if you think about like when people before contact lenses and everybody used to be nearsighted, I think people were quite dirty and they had a lot of kind of hair coming out of their faces and their, eyeballs. Yeah. And they didn't really know. But maybe they had better vision because they didn't have any screens. There was no television.
And they also couldn't read at night. Because reading by candlelight is almost impossible, so they weren't straining their eyes reading in bed.
Like I do think that there's, we think of that the past was very conformist, and in a sense it was like, oh, well, you have to be a Christian or something. But in other ways, it was probably much less conformist, Wow. Well, like, I mean, right now we're living in the most conformist era in history in terms of, there is no deviation in thought or opinion that is tolerated, and there's very little deviation in styles of dress, really.
Mm-hmm. There are many different orthodoxies you can subscribe to, but when you're in the one you choose, you don't deviate within that. And is that what you mean?
And those orthodoxies are quite close to one another. Yeah. They're just versions of streetwear. I mean, I think that, if you went back to 1850, even as recently as 1850, people were probably wearing really weird things because people had to sew their own clothes.
Yeah.
And what you really notice about history and looking at history like these underground newspapers that you were just showing me.
1960s countercultural hippie papers.
Countercultural hippie papers. You really notice the diversity of the kind of like businesses that were around, and you got to figure that while we have more diversity in the sense of like, sure, there's more weird food from Fiji being flown in, but there's also much less diversity in a lot of other ways. Like, for example, chain stores have made our experiences absolutely uniform in almost every place. I mean, that's a very obvious critique of the modern era.
Yeah.
But it's like, at one point you could have got a chair that was built down the street. Now, obviously there's the craft revolution that's happening in the last 20 years that's trying to bring that back. But it's nothing compared to the post or the pre-World War II era when there was just a lot of industry in all different places.
Sure.
I mean, it wasn't until Sears Roebuck that things got really standard. And then it wasn't really until, I don't know, some legislation change probably in the 70s that things got really uniform.
I mean, we're talking about the Industrial Revolution and what came after. Like, I think the next big step was the perfection of assembly line manufacturing, right? And so Sears was all that. Everything became, you could make 1,000 chairs that were identical.
And World War II was very useful in consolidating industry and making, all of a sudden they were like, well, we have to feed 10 million people the same food. So, I mean, everything that we've grown up in is an attempt by corporate America to, use the same model that they perfected during World War II to feed everybody and to clothe everybody, don't you think? I mean,
I do.
TV dinners, everything, packaged food. The whole thing is just a version of what people were eating in Iwo Jima,
Yeah. K rations.
Just
or were K rations, were those not until Vietnam? I wonder.
They definitely had C rations.
C rations, right. I agree. And I think that this is not an uncommon way of looking at it. The newer perspective that I've found interesting that you brought up is the idea of the military being responsible for drug culture in a way that I hadn't really thought about before.
I mean, all the rock stars were in the army, Elvis, Jimmy, Lee Hazelwood, John Fogerty.
Yeah. Fogerty was in the army?
Yeah, Fogerty.
Wow. So Fortunate Son wasn't just tourism.
Probably not.
Oh, he didn't go to war, though.
I don't know. I doubt it.
Can you think of any rock stars who went to war after World War II? I mean, in the Korea or Vietnam era.
That's a good question.
I don't think I can...
there's a whole theory about the LA counterculture being a mind control experiment by the intelligence agencies.
I didn't know
because, Jim Morrison...
His dad was in the army.
His dad was Marine intelligence, I believe. Okay. John Phillips' dad was, I think, Marine intelligence. Not Marine intelligence, naval intelligence. Naval intelligence is like, those are they're the ones who are, they're some heavy-duty characters, apparently. Yeah. And then Zal from Love and Spoonful's dad was some kind of military guy. Frank Zappa's dad was NSA.
That's the real dark
So
shit.
the whole Laurel Canyon scene, all those people were from the Delmarva military-industrial complex.
I read a book about this. Do you know this book? I'll find it for you. There's a book about the Laurel Canyon scene, and it's linking to this kind of like military history.
Yeah. Seems pretty legitimate.
I'll believe anything. I believe in ghosts. I believe in God. I believe in all of it. So you're writing screenplays. Have you been reading screenplays to sort of learn about the mechanics of them? Like how do you teach yourself?
It's hard to read screenplays. What I've noticed about screenplays is, I think they're like it's like a journal entry. It's really just for you.
Mm-hmm. What about everybody, most people who want to start writing screenplays, they feel like they have to read, Robert McKee.
Oh, right? Yeah. Or take a class. I have the book. I've never really opened it. Yeah.
Did you look at the mechanics, like the structures of how to do these things?
No, I don't want it to taint my genius.
You just jump in. Just let you be you.
I just think I'm a pure savage genius, and I just don't want it to mess that up.
How do you pronounce a fauvist? A falvist? A wild beast?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, I think it's fauvist. That's Rizzo. right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was one of them.
Fauvism.
Although, no, I don't know that he was. Was he? I think that, maybe he was.
Not Rousseau the philosopher, Rousseau the painter.
No, the painter, yeah. Maybe. But, he was considered a joke in his time, too, Rousseau.
Yeah, he's a brute.
Well, also, people thought he was a shitty painter. Like, the other painters bullied him.
Oh, yeah. And back then, painters were real bullies.
They were masculine, That didn't end until the 70s, really.
Yeah, Warhol talks about, that in his book. He's
going to the Cedar Tavern and getting beaten up.
Yeah. I heard you didn't like my cubes.
Punched in the face by Willem de Kooning. No, I think de Kooning was a peaceful man.
He was Dutch.
He was Dutch, very much so.
Just like the Colonel, Elvis's manager, who was apparently an escaped Nazi war criminal.
Wow. I didn't know that.
And they say that about de Kooning, too.
Really?
Yeah. And so, in fact, they say it about a lot of the...
No, de Kooning was here before that.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Ian, what did you read as a teenager? What are the sort of benchmark books that changed you as a teenager?
Herman Hesse.
Mm-hmm. The ones that we all, nothing too surprising. Yeah. On the Road.
Yeah. Kerouac.
Siddhartha.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
Maybe you should answer it.
I don't want to demystify myself too much.
Okay.
I don't want people to know my secrets. Yeah, no, it is probably, the typical hippie literature.
Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, just the countercultural prescription that the naval intelligence,
the reading list
thought up for us.
Yeah,
the reading list, exactly, that taught us wretched individualism.
You're anti-individualist, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's interesting, actually. Individualism. In the...
Well, I mean, we've talked before about how, the abstract expressionists, for example, I remember you going on at length at one point about, how it was a CIA initiative, right?
Yeah.
To support the idea of individualism and artistic expression to kind of be anti-communist propaganda.
Yeah.
Like, look how good things are here.
Yeah.
Anti-socialist propaganda.
Well, it was a heroic idea, like the idea that the avant-garde, that a heroic individualist avant-garde could be fostered by free market society.
So it worked.
Yeah. And there's a lot of books that are bragging, like, look, it worked. That's the thing about, conspiracy. There's we all shy away from conspiracy because it used to be the domain of the left. Conspiracies used to be kind of, the truth-telling left. Mm-hmm. And they were founded, whether they were kooky or not, they were founded on humanitarian principles.
Leftist
principles, humanism or whatever.
Yeah.
But, they've been given a bad name because now conspiracy theories have been kind of recuperated.
They're a thing of the right.
By
also.
the right.
Yeah.
And I have a theory as to why that is.
Okay. And
I think it's the legalization of marijuana.
Oh, fuck. Okay.
Because, marijuana also used to be the domain of the counterculture.
Yes.
It was pot smokers were people like, John Sinclair.
Mm-hmm. It was a way to set yourself apart.
Yeah. It was beatniks, jazz people.
Yeah.
The jazz bows, Turkish cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
But, somehow this whole legalization of marijuana, now people are smoking marijuana in like Colorado and Utah.
Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, California.
Yeah, in California. So people who, weren't leftist, who are like gun freaks and kind of libertarians and individualists are now smoking a lot of very powerful, potent marijuana.
Yes.
And that's why you have, that's Donald Trump in a nutshell.
I'm not following.
Well, just because the downside of marijuana, which, it's different. It's prescriptive to the personality.
Yeah.
But for some people, it results in a lot of paranoia.
Yes.
And a kind of, paranoia and, I don't know, what are some of the other bad side effects?
What, when pot goes bad?
Yeah.
Laziness.
Yeah, or, disgruntled paranoia.
Yeah. You can become an old crank.
Irritable. Yeah, so that's what, the Trump thing is. It's basically, irritable Paranoia.
I think you got to work on this one a little bit more. I wanted to go there with you on it, but I'm not quite getting like a oomph, like a epiphanic kind of vibe from it. I think it's interesting how much pot has become, how popular it's become with jocks.
Yeah.
That's become like the Joe Rogan school of sort of like jujitsu jocks, like, MMA folks. He just put up an episode of his podcast where he's interviewing Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson has a marijuana company now.
Oh, wow.
Right. Like athletes are super into pot.
Yeah.
And I think we were talking about this.
Basketball players.
We were talking about this.
It really helps your focus.
It's focus, right? You were saying that you think pot is the ideal drug for guitarists.
Yeah.
What's the ideal drug for singers?
Just love.
Love is a drug.
Yeah, they're just people who need a lot of affirmation. They just need a lot of praise.
Yeah,
applause. No, well, what we were talking about is that the reason marijuana has been legalized is because it is helpful to work situations now, and that every morality, especially around drug use or narcotics or whatever, what's a broader term for drugs or
gifts?
Is
gifts from nature.
It's how they can mesh with the needs of industry.
Yeah. I understand.
So now you really need to be smoking marijuana if you're going to be able to keep up with all the latest applications that are necessary to negotiate the world.
That's one way to look at it. I think it's true. I also, like I was saying earlier, think that the growth, the mainstreaming of pot has a lot to do with the fact that everybody is supposed to be a creative entrepreneur now. So it goes along with this whole idea, which I think is a fallacy around pot, of like letting your creativity blossom as a result.
Yeah.
When Jobs died, everyone was supposed to just start a website or like become a painter or join the Etsy craft revolution like you were talking about. So pot goes hand in hand with being creative, right? And everyone's supposed to be creative now. So everyone should smoke pot.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Or start your own pot company, a creative pot company.
Yeah.
So what's the deal? Yeah, what's happening with the economy around marijuana? Are people still being
I don't know.
hired?
I've wondered that myself. I mean, I know that one thing that I don't buy, I grow my own now. I have enough, I have enough pot here to supply me for a year probably. So I left.
Is there a lot of resentment among your friends who are hired to harvest marijuana?
I've just cut off all my marijuana harvesting friends. So I don't talk to them anymore. No, I don't know. I give it away.
You could hire them to harvest your marijuana.
Yeah, but I like doing it. It's meditative. So listen, what do you think about writers? Like, what do you think about the role of the writer in culture? What do you think about writing as a vocation?
The things that I've written have really come out of boring parts of my life. There's writers are supposed to put themselves, you're supposed to find a cottage in Maine that's isolated, right? So I think, writing, writers, they have to be cut off from society. I think they should prison is good for writing.
Eldridge Cleaver.
Yeah, like Abbott, who's the guy, Henry Abbott. Who's the guy with the belly of the beast or whatever?
I don't know.
Jean Genet.
Yeah, Genet.
There's so many writers who wrote in prison. So I think probably, writers should be put in prison.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. They should have to apply to be put into prison, like the way you have to get into grad school as a writer.
It's like
you have to prove that you're worthy enough as a writer to be
a residency
at Folsom.
At Folsom, yeah. San Quentin. Yeah, it's difficult because the penal system is so lenient now.
Yeah, they'll let anybody in.
Yeah, so you really have to commit a lot of crimes to get into one of these places.
To have the privilege of being a writer.
Yeah, and it's horrible. I've really lost a lot of friends. I've had to steal and assault steal from so many people.
And you still haven't been put in jail.
Yes.
Which is probably why you haven't written a bestseller.
Exactly.
What about poets? A special class of scum.
Poetry is different than writing.
Okay.
Because it's more akin to music. It can be irrational. It can, not make sense. Mm-hmm. It's a gesture. Mm-hmm. It's more like a brush painting or some kind of revelatory moment of silliness.
So should poets be imprisoned, or do they?
No, I think that prison would probably be bad for a poet.
Okay. And what about a lyricist?
Well, I mean, lyricists are obviously a kind of a lazy poet because you can get away with anything as long as there's a beat underneath it.
Yeah, but you have to rhyme, which is hard sometimes.
Yeah.
Natural rhymes that feel good. So I feel like lyricists have to work harder than poets. Well, what do you?
I've never really written poetry, so
Yeah, we've written lyrics.
Yeah.
Is it hard?
Well, I have some rules. Lyric writing for me is just it just has to be it has to be extemporaneous, or it'll be. I mean, for me,
Extemporaneous. What do you mean?
Like sort of off the top of your head. So you just start with an idea, and then you just sort of flow.
It's like tweeting.
Like rapping, really. I mean, I just think it's got to flow. It's got to feel natural. You have to remember what it is. It's not a lecture. It's not a piece of writing. It's just a very special thing. It has to exist in that space.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm going to ask you about some stuff that you probably won't talk about, but I'll try because that's making me think about the fact that a lot of the lyrics, like your early lyrics, Nation of Ulysses lyrics, they were message songs. They had points, right? Feels less extemporaneous to me than perhaps some of your later lyrics, but it felt very considered to me.
Yeah, those were pretty considered, but after that I swore never to write a lyric again, and I really have pretty much stayed true to that.
When did you stop writing lyrics?
As soon as that band was over, because I felt like that band felt very stiff, for me. I like it as a conceptually and writing wise, but lyrically, it was too formal. And I felt like after that, I was like, no, whenever you make music, you should remember what it began as, and music began as a kind of communication. Yeah. So just an extension of somebody in the parlor with an upright piano, banging out some notes and saying something witty. And that's really what a song should always be.
Cole Porter.
You were not even Cole Porter, but something like even more idiotic.
But what about dancing? You can't dance to that.
Well, yeah, piano is very percussive.
Yeah, but you don't dance to the guy in the parlor. I mean, because you're really into soul music. Where does that fit into this kind of?
Well, soul music is just secular version of gospel. So that's very similar. So extemporaneous, vocalizing version of a sermon with a kind of fable, a religious fable. So there's got to be some point. You say like it was in the blood. You just get a cool phrase. And you go back to that. Yeah. Everything else is just like
something that's vaguely spiritual.
Yeah.
If you're lucky.
It was in the blood. And something that sounds cool. Yeah. It's got to sound cool. Yeah. It was in the blood.
The blood of Christ is what they mean, though.
The blood. But the great thing about religion is that it's just like nonsense. They're just like saying all these words. It seems so fun.
No, I don't know what you mean. It seems fun. Yeah. Religion seems fun.
Yeah. I mean, whenever, you hear people like talking about, it's just these great words, and they're just having fun with language, really.
Yeah, and storytelling.
And numbers, and storytelling. Yeah, it's just, that's why, secularists, and I mean, I'm definitely a communist, but my only problem with communism is their contempt for religion, which I really... Yeah. I have contempt for science. I like religion.
Communists like science.
Yeah, see, that's the problem with communism.
So that's a pretty that's fundamental problem with you being a communist. So what is your communist platform for America? What would that look like?
I like communism from the I like the authoritarian aspect of it. I like the uniforms. I like the graphics. I like the destruction of wealth, the egalitarianism.
I like that.
The focus on fairness and the abolition of private property. The abolition of wealth. If you could, execute all the millionaires. That would be great.
Yeah. Which method of execution would you use?
I think firing squad. Yeah. That's one that allows the victim dignity.
Yes. And it's more egalitarian because there's a number of people doing it, and no one knows which fatal bullet. Yeah, which bullet was fatal.
And there's a cigarette and the blindfold and a wall. That's a beautiful way to be. Gary Glitter, when he was caught by the Vietnamese authorities for his sex crimes.
Yeah.
There was talk that they were going to execute him by firing squad. And I thought, wow, that's a really great way to kill him.
Do you know what his sign was?
Gary Glitter?
Yeah.
Good question.
I'd like to know.
I feel like he's a Libra.
Are there a lot of sex criminals among Libras?
No, I think I learned that. But maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. Wow, now I'm really curious.
Well, now every Libra who hears this, who knows that he's not a Libra, is going to be gravely offended by the association.
Gary Glitter made some really great music.
Yeah, he did.
He's just a horrible, sick man. So anyway, yeah, they were going to kill him by firing squad. I thought that was a really good way because, most rock stars die from drug overdoses or I was like, how trite to go that way. But if you were killed by firing squad, that would be something.
I'd like to go that way.
Yeah. Who wouldn't?
Do you know what sky burial is?
No.
I think it's in Tibet or Nepal or somewhere, maybe Mongolia. You don't know? You never heard of sky burial? After you die, they put your body out on the hillside and let the vultures pick it clean.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I always thought that was really beautiful. So if I could be shot by firing squad and then laid out for sky burial, that would be kind of the best exit.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite interesting that at one time people were dying so much that they had to bury people, because now you could really get away with sky burial because death is so unusual.
Yeah.
Only a couple of people die every day.
Yeah.
In any given province.
Yeah.
But at one point, people were dying at such a tremendous volume, they had to bury them because there was just no room.
Right.
On the hill.
Right. And nobody was alarmed by death back then either. Just like,
Yeah, it was just like, maybe there was 10 a day. So, and then there were still the rotting corpses from the day before. And then it was like,
we got to do something with these things.
Because life expectancy was shorter and there were more people being born dead.
Yeah.
And more people dying in childbirth.
Yeah.
And there was more trauma from blunt objects and more people dying from poison.
There were just anvils falling on people's heads all the time. Listen, I'm thinking about the link between writers and rock stars and how writers were at one time more like rock stars, and there aren't really any sexy writers anymore. You ever thought about that? Are there any sexy writers alive today?
That's interesting. Well, I have a whole theory about rock and roll, how it's the ultimate... It's kind of this imperialist art form that just, it started as a kind of pornography or bubblegum. It was considered like comics. Just a stupid vulgarity for children.
Right.
And then
novelty.
It was so seductive, and it just kept moving in, encroaching on every artistic territory. So it took over theater, theatrical performance.
The live concert became a replacement for theater going.
Yeah, and poetry, because bebop-a-loo-la or whatever. It filled in that need for nonsense that poetry had filled for centuries.
Yeah.
Centuries of poetry were demolished.
Yeah.
By rock and roll. And then religion. And then the gang life, there was no longer a need for a club or to be a Mason or to be in a street gang.
Because you can be a fan.
Or you could be, you identify with rock and roll, the essential identity is that you're an outsider to authority.
Yeah.
Or to society or whatever. And then it took over painting because you have the record covers and the posters and all that stuff, so suddenly it was like, well, who wants to see a Monet when you could look at the
Sgt. Pepper's
Doors record cover? Yeah, exactly. So then writing, of course, the writer, the novelist, because they kind of took over the drunken louche.
The Oscar Wilde role, sort of,
or
so is that
Dylan
why
Thomas? I mean, Bob Dylan.
Dylan Thomas,
took his name.
Is that why it seems like, and at a certain point, writing became even more and more of a sort of like, the more bookish and academic and monk-like you could appear, the more seriously you're taken as a writer, right? Whereas writers used to be, like Dickens even, who was not sexy by any means, but he was kind of a rock star.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
I think we need sexy writers again.
But isn't there some sexy writers?
I don't think so. I think there are writers who are like sexed up, like they write about sex, or they,
Stephen King.
Stephen King is super sexy, yeah. Super sexy. What's his name? Jonathan Franzen.
Yeah, no, I feel like there are some sexy writers.
I think there are sexy poets.
John Le Carre.
He's sexy. He's suave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right, Ian Fleming, he was like a real rock star.
Yeah. And I don't really know that exists anymore. Poetry, it does.
Yeah.
Because poetry is more physical, I guess.
Who's a sexy poet?
Eileen Myles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, she's a sex symbol, I think, for a lot of people.
For sure.
I can't think of any writers who are like that. I'm going to work on this theory a little bit.
Wait, what was the question? Oh, yeah, the link between writers and rock stars. Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm reading the Cosi Fanny Tutti memoir.
It's a good book.
Yeah, it's fun, fun to read.
Yeah.
And then I'm reading...
Did you read Viv Albertine's memoir?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
That's a good one.
I just interviewed her at a year ago.
That's pretty cool.
Primavera, the festival in Barcelona.
What was she like?
She was cool. But she said, I don't want to talk about all that punk stuff. And it's sort of like, well, you wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
That you're being interviewed for.
Yeah.
And then she said something else that I objected to, which was, she was like, I was the only woman guitar player in England.
It's not true.
I was like, no.
Yeah.
But I didn't say that to her face. But she's lovely, and I loved the book. I thought it was great.
Do you have another book coming up?
Yeah, I'm working on it. It's more of a pamphlet. Mm-hmm. It's like a screed.
What's it about?
I can't reveal it yet because there's so many many pretenders out there who might just, and they work faster than me.
They do.
Because
they use emojis.
Their marijuana is stronger and they're more focused.
And there we go. A little time spent with Ian is always really inspiring to me. It kind of gets me looking more closely at the minutia of the things that I care about that I might take for granted, like, music and films. I think what Ian's doing in his writing is kind of his own version of Roland Barthes in what he did in his book Mythologies. That's the one where he looks at things like wrestling, Greta Garbo, wine and milk, and he scrutinizes them. He treats them like modern forms of myth. I think Ian does the same thing in his own way. Anyway, I know we didn't talk all that much about books in this episode, but Ian and I have already decided to do another book-heavy episode sometime soon. So watch out for that. As for Ian's more recent musical activities, he fronted a band called Shane and the Gang, which is a really great name, that made garage rock, which was often crime-themed. That was a few years ago. And now Ian, along with his partner, Alexandra Cabral, is in the group Escapism. Ian plays guitar for the first time in this group, and he approaches the instrument in a way I've never seen before. It's amazing. So look them up if you don't know them, and definitely see them live if you can. You can find more Apology stuff, like the magazine and merch, at shopapology.com. If you're liking this podcast, please subscribe, review it, spread the word is what I mean, basically. This episode was recorded by me at home in Mount Washington, Los Angeles. It was edited and helped out by Justin Geller and Lars Kreslins in Philadelphia. And the music is Bach, arranged by Cyrus Garamani, who used to live in Los Angeles but now lives in the Bay Area.